It now gives me great pleasure to welcome Barak Rabinowitz to hear from a VC's perspective on investing in cybersecurity. So please welcome Barak.
Thank you, Richard. We're used to hearing about Israeli startups on the cyber defensive side, but this morning my partner Chris and I visited an online gambling company here in Sydney, and they were complaining to us that every month they're subjected to Israeli hackers trying to steal their customer database. So I apologize on our behalf. Okay, when Bibi Netanyahu spoke at the UN, he said some interesting things. Whether you like or dislike Bibi, I think we can all agree he's a good speaker, so when he speaks, I try to tune in. And what he said is that in cyber, Israel is punching a whopping 200 times above its weight. Many seek to benefit from Israel's ingenuity, and what was interesting to me is he talked about this fusion of big data, connectivity, and artificial intelligence. And he says that that fusion is changing our world in every way. So first of all, what does he mean Israel is punching 200 times above its weight? Fact is, Israel accounted for 0.1% of the world's population today. Yet last year we attracted some 20% of global private investment in cybersecurity. More than 300 cybersecurity companies are operating in Israel, making it an industry second only to the US in size. Why? Because Israel is a very popular target for hackers, whether it's anonymous or the government of Iran. Every day that goes by, there are more attacks. Carmi Gilon, the former head of Israel's Shin Bet, the internal secret service, said that if he had to rank existential threats that Israel is facing, cyber would come only after nuclear weapons. And simply put, learning to fend off all of these attacks turned out to be a very profitable business. So if hackers are targeting your banks, your planes, your power grids, and just about everything else, and they are, Israel can offer indispensable help. So let's go back to Bibi's speech. He talked about a fusion of big data, artificial intelligence, and connectivity. This model really fits what we see in the last 10 years. You have companies like Google that track everything you do online. They provide a layer of intelligence on top of it to serve you up targeted ads on any device that you're using. Facebook did the same thing, except they have a private network to tell your personal preferences. And they jumped ahead of Google because they were a first mover in mobile. And that correlates with their stock jumping from around $20, where I bought and sold it, to over $100 where it trades today. So it's interesting, if you think about cyber attacks, it works in exactly the opposite way. You have hackers targeting you at the periphery, using artificial intelligence to simulate some behavior, and then access your data, just like this gaming company told us about their player database. On the way over here, I was reading a novel. It was called Cyber War. It was written like 6 years ago, and it was one of the first novels to raise awareness about cyber warfare. And he set out a picture dating back to 2007. He said he talked about the banks of the Euphrates River. He talked about North Korean workers finishing a hard day's work, queuing up in an orderly fashion to catch their buses back to the base. And out of nowhere, blinding light, concussive sound waves, and debris everywhere. And if you squinted, if they squinted, they could just make out F-15 and F-16s flying off into the distance. And if they looked really hard, they could see a Star of David on the wing. So what happened? Israel had attacked what they suspected to be a nuclear weapons development site. That's not remarkable in itself. What's remarkable is Syria had just spent multi-billions of dollars with Russia to bring online a new cyber air defense network, which was caught completely off guard. Now, people speculate what happened there. How was it that the Syrians were caught off guard and didn't have any warning about these fighter jets coming to eliminate many years and many billions of dollars of work? Some suspect that Israel flew a drone, a cyber drone, into Syrian airspace and just deliberately intercepted the sonar beams, which is effectively radio waves, two-way radio waves that are meant to detect objects and then transmit information back to the receiving station usually about the size, the distance of threats. But in this case, Israel may have embedded some computer code that, again, accessed their air defense network through the periphery, used artificial intelligence, and made sure that what the Syrians saw was what Israel put there. That's how war is fought today. That's what we call cyber war in the information age. And so there's a dark side of connectivity. Everybody boasts about how we're all connected, all available 24/7. The fact is it's a double-edged sword, making people and businesses more accessible, but at the same time more attractive targets to hackers. Firms like Home Depot, Staples, Primera, Anthem Healthcare, even the United States Postal Service have all experienced major hacks in the last 2 years. A company that we backed, my partner at F2 Capital, it's called NSO Group. Now what they do is they discover basically vulnerabilities, unknown and unpatched iOS vulnerabilities. This is known as a zero-day attack, and they use it to access personal information. If you're a government and you want to work with them because you suspect a criminal is operating in your domain, you pay NSO Group $500,000 setup fee and another $500,000 for every 10 iPhones you want to hack. If it's a BlackBerry, it's $350,000. Francisco Partners acquired 51% of this business for $100 million, and now it's valued between $750 million to $1 billion. Now, when it comes to targets, size doesn't matter. Almost 2/3 of all targeted attacks are small to medium-sized businesses. Why? Because small companies are basically providing a backdoor into larger organizations right up the supply chain. Now, if we think about other emerging sectors, we talked about connected cars in the last talk. 75% of the 92 million cars shipped globally in 2020 will be connected, but only 2% of microprocessors in cars have hardware security features. Connected cars will have approximately 100 million lines of code. That's compared to 8 million lines of code for an F-35 fighter jet. And complexity is the enemy of security. Let's think about other sectors. Talk about drones. Drones may hover over your organization and execute what's called a mid-M attack to eavesdrop on your wireless print jobs by exploiting wireless printing networks within your organization. Infiltrating and inserting malicious code into unsecured or improperly secured Wi-Fi networks is another known attack vector, just utilizing off-the-shelf consumer drones. F2 operates an accelerator called the Junction. In this current wave, we have one company called Convexum that is doing anti-drone technology that you can deploy around your perimeter, whether you're a oil and gas company, a mining company, or if you're trying to prevent Mark Zuckerberg's private residence. On the other hand, we have another company called Regulus X that is cybersecurity for drones, which may end up being a bigger threat. We can see drones being hijacked, flown into stadiums. The fact is, all of these threats are real, and you have a responsibility as an organization to utilize this technology to prevent the threats. By the way, I want to quote, I met earlier today Annie Parker from Telstra Murudi, and we were talking about the relevance of this technology for Australia. And she's a newcomer to Australia. She's originally from England. And she said, if there's one thing Australia has a shit ton of, it's space. That needs to be secured. Let's move further up the chain, artificial intelligence. The way artificial intelligence works is you give it a training set, and as you expose the artificial intelligence to more data points, it gets smarter. And that's a classic AI curve showing that you eventually reach 95% accuracy. What it means is if you can feed an AI technology volume, you're going to get a big step up. If we go back to Google, what happened with Google? They were powering search queries. And every query they power, they get more relevant and more smart, and that creates a bigger barrier to entry. Speaking of Google, in 2016, earlier this year, Google's DeepMind team beat the #1 ranked player in Europe in the game of Go. His name is Fan Hui, and Google DeepMind beat him in 5 games in a head-to-head series. Why is it remarkable? Because the number of moves in Go is so vast as to be practically impossible to compute and analyze in a reasonable amount of time. Compared to chess, Go has 2.08 times 10 to the power of 170 opening moves. Google combined a classic Monte Carlo tree search with neural networks to analyze the board and learn from top players, improving as it goes. Google already created an AI system that can learn to mimic human speech rather than the stilted sounds we hear from Apple's Siri or Microsoft's Cortana. On the defensive side, the idea is to produce systems that can patch themselves, watch for intrusions, and so on with minimal human interaction. It's nice to know that your computer can look out for itself. In a related domain, we're backing a company called Sematics. Sematics is artificial intelligence and specifically computer vision for connected homes. So it can watch who is approaching your door, and are they a known entity, like the nanny, or are they an unknown possible criminal? Trigger an alert on your mobile phone and call the police or emergency responders. Finally, there's big data. The prospect of a catastrophic cyber loss is becoming more likely. Loss of data and reputation could put a big corporation out of business. Think about Target. Target, back in 2014, was subject to one of the largest hacks in history. Personal details of 70 million people were compromised, costing the company an estimated $100 million in direct payouts alone, plus reputational damage, plus the CEO had to resign. This is where it gets interesting. Think about cyber insurance. 90% of states in the US have mandatory notification laws. That means if you've been hacked, you can't hope to cover it up and respond in a low-profile way. You must notify your entire customer database. And as a result, cyber insurance market is now worth over $2 billion in premiums, driven by regulation and demand. Yet fewer than 10% of companies are thought to purchase cyber insurance today. So we expect this market to grow by double digits to $20 billion in the next 10 years. The average cost of a data breach is $3.8 million in 2015, up from $3.5 million. And that was shown by a recent study of victims of cyber hacks. There are a number of stealth mode companies in Israel operating in cyber insurance. There's also others operating in drone insurance against liability that you could be exposed to from a drone falling out of the sky or hacking into your airspace. Happy to discuss those offline. Now, how do you invest in this domain? It's clear that it's interesting to get in early, right? Especially in cybersecurity. We see that cybersecurity companies not only raised 44% less capital, but they were acquired 3 years faster than regular enterprise software companies. Young teams yielded an ROI that was 4.5 times higher than the ROI yielded by companies with more experienced entrepreneurs. And 40% of cybersecurity teams that completed a successful exit were made up of young guys and girls right out of the Army, compared to 10% for software enterprises generally. Nevertheless, it's extremely risky to back early-stage companies. In Israel, we talk about the Series A crunch. Basically, if we look at Q2 2016 data, there were 106 seed-stage companies. Only 37 made it to Series A funding. The average seed round is $1 million, which you may be able to scrape together from friends and family. But when you go for the Series A, the average amount is $6 million. And it takes a hell of a lot of traction to justify a $6 million check. So a lot of good companies and good teams are just washing out at that stage, when you've burned out your angels, and yet there's no dedicated fund to back you. And that's what F2 is all about. How do we invest? We pioneered the Junction, Israel's first commercial accelerator, back in 2011. Since then, 120 companies have come through the program. We refine the model every year. We've had numerous exits to multinationals. And it's all about options. I hear Australians love options, so that's what we utilize at the Junction. We screen 250 companies every 6 months, together with our strategic partners, like Telstra, to identify interesting trends and big global opportunities. We then narrow that list down to 5 companies that enter our program. We take an option to invest in all 5 companies once they leave the program. So basically, we're spending 6 months with these teams. My partner and myself sit at the accelerator doing hands-on due diligence while we try to help the businesses grow. And in that way, we filter the signal from the noise and back the winners. I want to switch over and talk about the role of multinationals in this landscape. You're all familiar with Startup Nation, the book that put Israel on the map for many of you and many others. The author is now working on a new book about multinationals. Now, many think about multinationals and their role in this ecosystem of helping startups scale. He said actually it starts way sooner than that. In Israel, we're in a bit of a vacuum. We have entrepreneurs, engineers who are very clever and they like to tinker, and very often we have technology-led businesses rather than demand-led businesses. So corporate partners and corporates can help us identify if what we're seeing is interesting and relevant and capital efficient and scalable on a global stage before we invest. Now, 52% of Fortune 500 companies since 2002 are no longer around. They just became irrelevant. The other half has embraced innovation, and many of them come to Israel for it, many of them listed here. Through our accelerator, we partner with a lot of these folks, HP, SAP, Munich Re, NL, all looking for a viable way to tap into Israeli innovation and help their companies gain an edge. And that, again, is why we're a proud partner of Telstra, and I hope that we can play some role in helping not only Telstra, but others identify investments, like Richard mentioned, in companies like Zimperium in the mobile security space. It's a classic example of the way multinationals and Israeli startups can work together, where the multinational, in this case Telstra, became the biggest customer of the Israeli startup and validated it and eventually led the Series A investment round in the business. One parting note. Again, we look at a lot of data and we see that Israeli companies are aiming higher. In the 23 years between 1990 and 2013, 30 companies reached billion-dollar valuations. But in the 2 years, from 2013 to 2015, we've already had 14 companies reach that level. So we're aiming higher. The threat is real, but so are the opportunities. Thank you.